Previously on X-Men.
Coming to you live from the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. It's the Movie Change Up Podcast Disney Plus Weekly Review, where each week me, Joe Fricke, and my co-host Tristan Mayer give you an update in this week in Disney Plus, whether it's content that drops or news or trailers or any kind of information related to Disney Plus we get throughout the week. We're kind of in a slow patch for Disney Plus. It's a lot more news heavy and not so much content heavy. We're kind of just waiting for Moon Knight to drop before we can really delve deep into content, but it seems like they're kind of giving us one big piece of content each week. Last week it was the making of Hawkeye. This week it was the making of the Eternals. We got some other topics to talk about, but Tristan, how do you feel about Disney Plus this week? Are you happy you have this subscription?
I'm still happy. It's a slow week, like you said, but I'm excited to talk about this stuff. And we're going to talk about the X-Men animated series, so I think that's kind of an appeal of Disney Plus. You get to go back and catch up on these old classic shows you might not have gotten a chance to watch when you were a kid. So that was really fun for me to do this week. And Eternals, I had a really great time with that movie, so it was good to get the behind the scenes of it. So it'll be a good conversation here, even though we didn't have quite as many drops as we necessarily would like. I'll take some downtime because it seems like we're going to have a lot of stuff coming out later in the year between Moon Knight and all the other Marvel shows. So yeah, I'm still happy with it. I'm not canceling it anytime soon.
Yeah, me either. All right, so let's get started in this first topic, and that is the making of the Eternals. Marvel's assembled. Pretty standard. I had the same thought last week. They all kind of feel the same. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. It's like, hey, making this thing was fun. Also, take a look at the stunt team. Pretty much what all these are. I kind of did like it, and they went a little bit into the costume department and all that, and I'm sure you were a fan of that aspect, and I like that too. Yeah, these are all kind of generic. I'd like it more if they showed a little bit more of problems they might have had on set, because all movies have problems. Like, oh, we had this problem, and this is how we overcame it, but it was all just like, oh, it was basically like summer camp, and we made a movie at the end. But what were your thoughts on this little documentary?
Yeah, these are definitely puff pieces for the movies. They don't at all want to focus on the problems. And I like you said, I think it would have been nice to be like, okay, here's some of the issues we had. And there's some of that. They're saying, oh, it was hard to shoot on location. It was a big struggle for us because Marvel were used to doing a lot of studio shoots. So they talked a lot about how Chloe Zhao was insistent on going and shooting in person and outside and whenever she possibly could and using practical sets where she could. So I think that really shone through in the movie. And I like that this behind the scenes focused a lot on those production design effects and the costume design. I think that was what made Eternals unique, was it looked so cool, and they brought all these different eras of time to life, and it really got into the details. Like, oh, they went to ancient Mesopotamia, and they really wanted to make sure they captured this era so well, and I loved the details of that. And they talked about all the buildings they did and the statues and that kind of stuff, and all the little tiny scratches and details that they went into the statues and the costumes. So that was fun for me. And like you said, they don't really add a lot to the conversation about the movie, but I had a good time learning about it, especially production design. I also thought it was very funny when Kevin Feige said, we just finished up making the final Avengers movie, and I was like, no, you didn't. Yeah. You did not.
No. It would
good phrasing, but
it would be kind of interesting if we never got another Avengers movies. All the big team-up movies were called something else. Our next big team-up movie was called the X-Men and, whatever group, or something else, and it was just Avengers Endgame was literally the last Avengers movies. There are going to be other big team-up movies, but it's maybe the next one is X-Men meets the Eternals, or maybe they kind of do Captain America Winter Soldier, or Captain America Civil War, all of their big team-up movies, and the next big team-up movie could just be called The Eternals, blah, 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 and it's part of the internal story, but it is still a big team-up movie.
Yeah, because when you think about it, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is sort of like a Civil War level event, but it's in a Doctor Strange movie, so I could see them going that route, and at least holding us off on Avengers movies for a good long time.
Yeah. All right, is there anything else you really want to say about this documentary?
One thing I really liked about it was they talked to all of the cast and kind of what it meant for them to be in these roles and specifically what it was like when they first put on the costume. So I thought that was a really cool touch, and they talked about kind of their emotional reactions to being in these roles, and the diversity angle of this movie gets talked about a lot, and I think that's sort of sometimes used as like a political ammo for one side or the other to be like, oh, it's bad because of this or it's good because of this, and I think sometimes it's cool to focus on the individual people who actually get to experience this, and I thought that was nice to see, and they talked about this really emotional moment with I can't remember the guy's name now from Atlanta who was in this.
Brian
Also,
Tyree Henry.
Yeah, Brian Tyree Henry talked about the really powerful moment of like putting on his costume and he felt nervous and he felt like he was kind of having this anxiety about like I don't look like a Marvel character should look, and I appreciated the emotional honesty of that because we talked about how these can kind of be puff pieces and kind of be like, oh, wasn't this the greatest experience of all time and everything is perfect and amazing, and that kind of got into like the struggle a little bit of these people coming into these roles and not feeling necessarily comfortable at first or confident at first and then having to grow into them. And I think it shows in the movie that all these people feel unique to be in the Marvel universe. It's not a bunch of like generic hot white dudes or whatever. I mean, there's Richard Madden, but they have a lot of interesting people in this cast, and I think this documentary highlighted that.
Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting too is they were talking about the first time they all met and saw each other was at that Comic-Con, and part of me kind of got the vibe that they didn't fully know who else was in the movie until that Comic-Con and they all met, because I'm sure Marvel tries to keep things hush-hush, like sometimes people are filming scenes and they don't even know what movie it's for. So part of me, I was kind of getting the vibe that they were all looking around and realizing who else was in the movie with them, and they were like, oh, like we got a cast for this one, like basically a lot. I mean, there's some no names, but for the most part, it's a lot of A-list talent or people like on the cusp of A-list, whether it's Angelina Jolie, Selma Hayek, Richard Madden, who, I mean, isn't really big outside of Game of Thrones, but he was like one of the faces of the biggest TV show of all time, so.
Yeah, they did a great job casting this movie. You got Angelina Jolie in this, about like actual superstar actress, and yeah, and it was also cool to see Chloe Zhao because I loved her as a director, and I thought it's great to see when Marvel takes these indie artists and gives them these huge, gigantic blockbusters, and they're actually able to have a touch of themselves in there and not just turn it into this generic kind of corporate studio movie. And this one definitely seemed like they were focusing on, we wanted it to be a Marvel movie and also have the Chloe Zhao injected into there too. So that was something I liked about it also.
Yeah. All right, if you don't have anything else to say, we can move on to our next topic.
What do we got?
All right, our next topic, just a small bit of news. John Williams is going to score the theme for the Obi-Wan Kenobi Disney Plus TV series. Now, I don't think he's scoring the whole thing. I think he's just doing the theme, and they're probably going to bring someone else to do the series as a whole, whether it's Kevin Kiner, who scored basically pretty much all of the animation stuff, or if they're bringing in someone else to do that. I'm just very curious to see who they get, but I'm excited that John Williams is doing the theme for the show. I imagine it's a similar situation as the Solo movie where they brought in John Williams to do Solo's main theme, but brought in someone else to do everything else, and I feel like that's the situation they're going for here. And I think this could be a good situation to bring in someone like Kevin Kiner, who people may not know, because you can do like the final credits, it can say like main theme composed by John Williams, and then underneath everything else Kevin Kiner, and that could be a good transition for him to start doing some of the more live action stuff. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sure John Williams, I mean, he's getting up there in age, so this could be one of the last times you see him do a Star Wars score, so I'm excited to hear it. And it was one of the nice parts about Rise of Skywalker was that he got to come back, and even the whole sequel trilogy, it was cool that he was back and he was working in the Star Wars world again, and it felt like Star Wars because John Williams was there, but I also felt kind of disappointed because a lot of his work in the sequel trilogy was repeated themes and repeated motifs from the original trilogy, not a ton of standout original music in that. So I'm excited to hear him do something new, and I think it works perfectly. John Williams is so entrenched with Obi-Wan Kenobi from the original all the way to the prequels, and it's a perfect fit for him to be doing the theme here. I can't wait to hear it.
All right, yeah. Not much conversation had to be about that topic. We just wanted to let people know who maybe don't follow the news directly.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd come in here and be like, yeah, John Williams sucks. I hate this news.
Yeah, John Williams does suck, man. Superman theme sucks. The Olympics theme sucks. The Jaws theme sucks. Jurassic Park sucks. The score for The Post sucks. Yeah, all the classic John Williams scores. All right, and so our next topic is one that I was very pleasantly surprised by, and that is the trailer for Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. When that news was announced, I'm like, all right, I'll watch it. I was a fan of the show. The movie's probably gonna not be very good. And then the trailer started, and for anyone that hasn't seen it, it kind of looks like it's set in the same world as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where the characters have kind of lives outside of the show as well as in the show. The Chip and Dale are voiced by John Mulaney and Andy Samberg, and they're not doing the typical like Chip and Dale voice. I kind of think there's going to be a moment where I think the movie's probably going to be open with an episode of them as Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, and their voices are going to be like how you remember from the show. You're going to hear cut, they're going to walk off camera essentially, and they're going to transition right into their Andy Samberg and John Mulaney voices. And the movie looks fun. It's brought to you by the people who've done a lot of the Lonely Island stuff. I think it's going to be an interesting take on the different styles of animation. There's even the joke of the one of them having CGI surgery. So, Tristan, are you kind of in the similar mindset of I, where as soon as that trailer came out, your expectations and hopes for this movie skyrocketed?
Yeah, this went from something I was not excited for in any way. Like, it wasn't like I was thinking it was going to be terrible, but I was like, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, I don't care, It's going to be some filler kids content for Disney Plus. But yeah, this trailer really impressed me, and I like the humor here. And like, you had Seth Rogen at the end as this kind of joke on the Uncanny Valley. He's playing this CGI like Viking-looking character, and they're like, "You don't look real. You don't look normal." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I look like a perfect normal human."
Yeah.
And has this really unnatural look to him.
Yeah, I think it was very much a take on the Beowulf movie from a couple years, or from like 10 plus years ago now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I like the commentary on like this transition between 2D animation and 3D, and kind of like that soft ground in the middle, and that's something that animation movies are kind of debating of, like, what is the era of 2D totally over with? Are we going to be in like a completely 3D animated world now? And I think this is going to be a fun one to watch and relevant. And like, I'm glad that the Lonely Island people are involved, because I think they brought a lot of the creative humor to it, and I think they're going to bring a lot of the fresh voice to it. So I think it's going to be a surprisingly one that's worth watching.
Yeah, it was kind of funny when they did the gag of like, oh, we need disguises, and they run through the thing, and he's wearing his classic outfit, and they turn back, and it's the Indiana Jones. It's like an Indiana Jones costume store essentially, because my mind was blown. Like, it was like 10 years ago now when I realized that Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, one was based on the look of Indiana Jones and one was based on the look of Magnum PI, one being like the most popular movie series at the time and one the most popular TV series at the time, and I felt very stupid.
Yeah, now they have Indiana Jones to themselves.
Yeah, and they can do whatever they want. I hope Tom Selleck and Tom Selleck and Harrison Ford make cameo appearance somewhere in the movie.
That would be funny.
Yeah.
Maybe you can get Harrison Ford as like the cashier at the Indiana Jones store, know?
Yeah, exactly.
Just some angry old guy who has to work this dead-end cashier job, but it's at the Indiana Jones store.
Yeah, I like it. All right, anything else you want? Or go ahead.
I like the Roger Rabbit cameo.
Oh, yeah.
We have a literal Roger Rabbit appearance. He said it maybe takes place in the world of Roger Rabbit. I think it literally takes place in the world of Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
Roger Rabbit's here in the movie. I wonder how many cameos and how much they're going to get into the meta of this and bring in a lot of their huge Disney collection of characters.
Yeah, and we also had Paula Abdul sighting along with the animated cat from her music video that was kind of one of the first ever live action animated hybrid things that even predates Who Framed Roger Rabbit, so that was cool.
I love animated cats, Joe.
Yeah. Oh, also we saw the cats from Cats. That was great.
I know.
I forgot about
favorite.
That.
I loved seeing those cats. That's what I was thinking. There's going to be a lot of fun humor. Like, a Cats reference is not something I would have expected in a Disney Plus movie ever.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see what more they can pull out with the fun humor and the jokes and the references.
Well, we finally get the butthole cut.
Oh, we better. If there's anywhere to put it, it's Disney Plus, Joe.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you got to say about Chip 'n Dale?
I haven't actually seen the original show, so this will be my first time seeing Chip 'n Dale. I mean, I've seen them in like Kingdom Hearts and like other content that they were in, but I don't think I've watched the Chip 'n Dale show, so this will be my first time watching them on their show.
Yeah, if I remember right, because I haven't seen it in probably like 15 years, But yeah, you had Chip and Dale, and then they had, kind of, if you saw the overweight mouse kind of from the trailer, that was Monterey Jack. He was somewhat the leader of the group. Then you had Gidget, and then there were a few other characters that would pop up a lot, and it was kind of like your mystery adventure of the week type thing.
I'm looking forward to the movie. I'll probably check out a couple episodes to get some context on the show before I watch it.
Yeah. All right, so that brings us to our next topic, which is Snowdrop, which is a Korean soap opera, which is super popular in the Eastern world. So Disney Plus is like, well, we're gonna buy the American rights to that so we can stream it. It's like 16 episodes long, hour and a half long episodes. We both watched it and consumed the content. Tristan, how did you feel about the first episode of Snowdrop?
I was interested in, like I said, it's an hour and a half, so it was kind of a bite to take. It was very long, and it's obviously in Korean, so you had to really like pay attention, look at the screen, and follow along. And it's also about historical events that I wasn't super familiar with, so it was kind of a hard one to follow plot wise for me. But I was interested in it, and I only saw the first episode, but I'm curious to see the rest.
Yeah.
If you don't know, it follows. It's kind of a love story between these university students, Yoon and Lim, who are in Korea in the 1980s, and the woman of the relationship is a student who's dedicated to this kind of rising socialist movement in South Korea. These young people who are discovering socialism and trying to kind of inspire their country to move to more progressive stances. And meanwhile, the boy, we find out by the end of the first episode, is a spy for North Korea who has kind of been assigned to infiltrate this student movement. So you have this conflict of these people from two different worlds who are yet fallen in love, So you have that kind of Romeo and Juliet, kind of star-crossed lovers from across the pond kind of love story here. And I've only seen the first episode, so I like what I've seen so far. It mixes in the drama and the romance pretty well, and the historical commentary. And like I said, I don't know much about this historical event myself, and I know there's been some controversy around how it was portrayed in terms of its accuracy to history or how inaccurate it was to history. But for me, it's a fictional K-drama. I'm looking for a history lesson here, and I'm gonna finish out this at least a couple more episodes of this. I don't know if it's worth talking about episode by episode, week to week, but I'm curious to watch at least a couple more episodes and see how this starts to go along. There's 16 episodes. That's kind of a lot for an hour and a half long episodes, but I'll at least give it a handful more and see where it goes, because I'm liking the characters and I'm liking the drama here. So it'll be a one that I'll definitely be filling in, especially while we have a bit of a gap here between actual big releases for Disney Plus.
Yep. All right. And yeah, I basically echo everything you said. I definitely also had time to watch this show, and I did that, and so I agree with everything Tristan said, which brings us to our next topic. The X-Men animated series. We're getting a continuation on Disney Plus coming later this year. Tristan went back and watched the entire series, so I've never really watched it. I know that and Batman the Animated Series are kind of considered the two holy grail, superhero animated shows. So I'm curious to get Tristan's take on it and thoughts on it, and if it's something worth going back and watching, or if it's a show more built on nostalgia than actual quality.
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot of nostalgia around this show. A lot of people who grew up in the 90s are like convinced this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to like the world, and I hadn't watched any of it. So when they announced this new show, I thought, oh, perfect opportunity between this and the Multiverse of Madness trailer and all that kind of stuff. I thought, oh, perfect time to get into my X-Men era here. So if you notice the intro, we had a bit of an X-Men theme. So it's not just this week X-Men. We're going to be talking about throughout this gap between now and Moon Knight. We're going to be covering the X-Men film franchise, at least the highlights of it. So we're going to be going through all that.
Few.
There's some, and this is one of them, because for me, I was actually very, very impressed by this, and I thought this was legitimately one of the best comic book shows I've seen. It really captures that feeling of pulling out a comic book and getting this story with these characters, and I think it has that feeling of like a comic book come to life, where you have these stories that are individual, yet they run into each other, and they're all kind of like larger than life. And I can tell as someone who watched as a kid and immediately fall in love with all these characters and want these characters to be brought to life. And they do a great job focusing on the characters and building up those characters and allowing those characters to have some depth and some complexity, and not shying away from the political themes of X-Men and not shying away from the darkness that can lead to. And I was really impressed by how they were able to weave all of that together. So I was really, really impressed by this, and it adapts some like big storylines from the comics. It does like Days of Future Past and Dark Phoenix, and in long scale form too. Like the Dark Phoenix saga is adapted over the course of like an entire season, so you get the time to really spend with that and build up the character of Jean Grey to make her turn make sense even more so than it does in the movies. They try to do that storyline like 3 4 times in different ways in the movies at this point, and it's never really worked. And here it worked. So I definitely recommend checking this show out. I have a list here of some recommendations if you want them, Joe.
Definitely.
So, I have first for some. If you only had time for one episode and you're like, okay, Tristan, I understand it's good, but I got 20 minutes, make me watch one. I say watch episode 4 of season 1 called Deadly Reunion. This is an episode that follows Magneto taking over a power plant and trying to bait out the X-Men, and it's his reunion with Professor Xavier after their years of being apart, and you kind of get their backstory here of, they were friends and they were working together to bring the mutant kind and humankind together, and then they eventually kind of saw different directions and changed paths. So I think if you want to get the Magneto Professor X kind of past here, and you also want to get some really good action, just the X-Men getting in their jet flying out and fighting Magneto. It's a classic kind of adventure, standalone 1 episode story. So I think that's definitely one worth watching if you just got time for one. And by the way, some of these episodes are similar to the Clone Wars. They aired in a different order than they were actually produced, and the chronological order is kind of also questionable. So if I give an episode number here, it's going to be the Disney Plus episode number, not necessarily like the chronological order number or like the production order number. Classic Disney with their out of order episodes. But and then I also, if you have time for some longer stuff and you want to watch some multi-part epics, I have 3 here that are definitely worth the watch. I mentioned Days of Future Past and the Phoenix Saga already. That Days of Future Past is in season 1. It's only a 2-episode arc, or 3 kind of. 2 episodes of Days of Future Past, and then it leads right into the finale. So you kind of get a 3-episode arc where they take the premise of Days of Future Past and change it a bit so that it ties into the continuity of the animated show. And then season 4, you have Beyond Good and Evil. It's a 4-part story about Apocalypse trying to finally enact his final plan to kind of destroy all of time. And Apocalypse is similar to Thanos in the show, where he kind of pops up here and there throughout the seasons for like an episode here, an episode there, and there's kind of this presence in the background all the way until season 4 when he finally has his Infinity War moment. He takes it over and has tries to finally get his victory. So that tells me he doesn't win though.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted to highlight the character Rogue, who got pretty shafted in the movies. After watching this, I'm like, wow, they really didn't get that character justice in the movies here. So I'd recommend checking out episode 108, The Cure, if you want to get a similar storyline to X-Men 3, where there's a cure presented for the X-Men or for mutants, and Rogue thinks she might want to get it. It's a similar premise to The Last Stand, but done a bit better and a much more focused on her individual character arc, so that it makes a little bit more sense of why she'd want to make that choice. And you also have A Rogue's Tale, where you get a flashback to Rogue's past working with the Brotherhood of Mutants for Magneto and being a bad guy, and what turns her to good. And it's also interesting because what turns her to good and is a fight against Captain Marvel, at this point known as Ms. Marvel. So you get to see an appearance of 90s version of Ms. Marvel with a 90s costume, and Carol Danvers with the big blonde hair, but a much different costume and going by a half different name. So I think that was pretty interesting. And lastly, I have 2 highlights that I think highlight villains that are worth talking about in this show. And the first is a 2-part episode called Till Death Do Us Part, where the main villain is Mr. Sinister. And I'm highlighting this one because he's a pretty big villain in like the second half of the show, and he's also coming back for the sequel series. So I have to imagine he's going to be the main villain or one of the main villains of the sequel show. And this is him interrupting Jean Grey and Cyclops are getting married, and he shows up and kind of like attacks the wedding. So he invades their wedding and ruins the best day. And then lastly, I have Family Ties. It's towards the end of the show, and it's Magneto's episode where his kind of tragic past is more fully explored, and you kind of really get into what he experienced and what turned him to being Magneto. And I thought it was worth mentioning this too, because kind of what inspires him to reflect on his life is the sudden appearance of 2 children he didn't know he had. So you get to see Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver show up, comic book accurate versions of those 2 characters. So you get the the blue costume out of Quicksilver. You get the red kind of pointy hat thing of the Scarlet Witch. So you get to see those old classic characters, and while they were in their villain era too. So this is at the point where they were still working for the Brotherhood of Mutants. So you get to see them as kind of these mixed bad guys who come in and kind of and they're not all bad too, because this is an episode where you get to see the backstory of Magneto, the backstory of those two. So you kind of get the complexity, and that's what I liked about this show, is that especially Magneto, but a lot of the villains are fairly complex, and even the heroes are not necessarily all good. You have characters like Gambit who are kind of problematic and aggressive, and Wolverine who's really angry and hostile. And I love that this show highlights that people who are very different can also work together for a shared goal and shared good. And I think that is a great element of the X-Men. And I think if you have only seen the movies and you want to get more of the characters, or if you've seen the movies and you thought, oh, they're okay, they have some hits here and there, but I wasn't really into them, I think this could turn you. It turned me from being, I like the X-Men, I guess, they're okay, to being genuinely very, very excited for more with the X-Men. And I can't wait to watch the movies now, because I have so much more context of these characters. So I had a great time with this, and I highly recommend watching it if you have the time, and especially now that we have a bit of a gap in Disney Plus and they're pretty short episodes. So you could at least hit some of the highlights here and there and watch what interests you, or some of the stuff I recommended. I definitely think it's worth it.
All right, yeah, I'm definitely interested in checking it out. And I guess one person I've seen online say like season 1 or something is like very grounded, and it's a lot of like Earth-based stuff, and then like the next season hits and it's like a bunch of stuff in space and stuff, and there's no real like clear transition really. It's just like Earth, and then bam, we're like taking rockets into space and fighting aliens. And
yeah, they definitely up the ante, and I like that, honestly. They go cosmic with it, and they're not afraid to bring in like really crazy characters from the comics and go all out with it. And I think when you look at the X-Men movies, you're going to talk about they tried to make it very grounded and try to keep it Earth-based for so long. And I like that this has the Earth-based storylines, but you're also able to go to crazy cosmic places and go to like the Savage Land and bring in a lot of characters I never thought I would being brought to life. So yeah, I definitely, it does have a transition, I guess, because you definitely feel like the growth of each season getting bigger and bigger in scale. But I definitely think the first 3 or so are the best seasons, and then the last 2 are a bit of a step down. But I think it's all worth watching for sure.
All right. Anything else you want to say about the X-Men animated series?
No, a great one. I can't wait to talk about the movies next week.
All right.
We're going to be doing week to week a movie each episode. So we're going to be starting with the first X-Men next week. So if you guys want to watch along, you can watch the first X-Men on Disney Plus.
All right, and that brings us to our final topic of tonight, and that is Loki Season 2 has 2 new directors, and I am completely blanking on their names and didn't think to write it down because I am a professional.
You got Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead.
All right, have they done anything of note that should get me hyped up for Loki Season 2?
The reason that I wanted to include this story, because you were originally not going to cover it, but I'm actually a huge fan of these directors. They're some of my favorite directors who are working right now, at least in the sci-fi genre. They've done some really some of my favorite stuff. 2017's The Endless was kind of their bigger breakout movie, but it was very much a small budget movie. So they're in the sci-fi, very small budget sci-fi genre. So I recommend Resolution and The Endless. Those are both, I believe, on Netflix, and they're kind of like these time loop storylines that are very impressive for their low budget. And it's going to be curious to see how they work on this larger scale, because everything they've done has been pretty small. They had, in 2019, they did the movie Synchronic, and I think that's probably where they got this role from, because they worked with Anthony Mackie on that movie. So I have to imagine that connection kind of, they didn't let go of that, and they're also working on Moon Knight, so you have that connection too. So if you end up really liking Moon Knight, you've got those directors now working on Loki Season 2. But I'm excited because, yeah, between The Endless and Synchronic, it really shows they have a knowledge of sci-fi, and that's what you want to get out of Loki, and some people who are able to go really kind of into the sci-fi craziness and into the timeline bizarreness. I really want to see what they're able to do with sci-fi concept with their hands kind of untied budget-wise. They also had a pretty big hit at Sundance this year, Something in the Dirt, So that's going to be a release at some point this year. But yeah, really exciting indie sci-fi actors, or sci-fi directors and also actors. But I kind of imagine they're going to be acting in Loki Season 2.
Yeah, they might have like a small role as like one of the desk people or something at the offices. But yeah. All right, yeah, I'm excited for it, intrigued by it. I think looking back, I think Loki was definitely my favorite Marvel series of the so far on Disney Plus. So
Yeah, I think what helped it a lot was that they had that unified vision. It wasn't like a bunch of different directors coming in with different ideas of what the show was going to be. And I think the fact that I don't think they're doing every episode, but they're doing like the large majority of the episodes. So that's going to help a lot in terms of keeping it as a singular vision and not feeling like a Book of Boba Fett kind of scenario where it's like 3 or 4 different people with 3 or 4 different ideas of what the show is, and no one really talking about what it is to each other. But I think this is going to be a much more unified piece.
Yep, for sure. All right, anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, quick episode this week, but yeah, pretty light on the content this week. But I definitely recommend X-Men, the animated series. That's probably my biggest highlight of the week.
Yeah, can't wait to talk about X-Men and then talk about X-Men 2, because I think the opening for X-Men 2 is one of my favorite film openings of all time. That and the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
Another great opening. Yeah, it's going to be fun to rewatch those. I'm doing a whole Marvel binge leading up to Multiverse of Madness, so this kind of timed out perfectly with my X-Men schedule. So
nice.
It's going to be a good one leading right up to that.
All right, can't wait to talk about it. All right, and without further ado, goodbye. Hey, thank you for watching the Movie Change Up podcast. We'd really appreciate if you liked, commented, subscribed, and shared us with anyone you think might be into what we're doing over here. Thank you. Have a nice day.